Hi, everyone. So today I wanted to look at mental disorders from a network perspective. Now, there's a emerging idea in neuroscience, psychiatry, that the brain is a complex system of interacting parts. That essentially the brain comprises multiple networks that helps support behavior. Central to this idea of network is a concept of a graph. You may ask the question, well, what is a graph? Well, a graph is a structure that has regions or parts that are connected or related to themselves in some way. And you could think of the parts of a graph as nodes and the regions as edges. Those are just technical definitions. Now, this simple concept of a structure that has nodes and edges, where the edges are the connections, like I said, and the nodes are just basically regions that are connected, is widely applicable to a variety of systems like cities, social networks, and so on. It's also applicable to the brain. And in the context of the brain, you could think of the nodes as brain regions and the edges between the nodes as connections. And there could be different kinds of connections. There could be structural connections and functional connections. There's a difference there. Structural connections, you're basically talking about physical links, physical connections between regions, such as white matter tracts. Functional connections, though, are a little bit different. Functional connections do not necessarily imply physical connections. There might be physical connections, but what it really looks at is the similarity in signal patterns between two regions. And let's spend some time there. Let's go into this concept some more. It's the concept of functional connectivity. Now, the way to understand functional connectivity is you could think of any imaging modality, such as magnetic resonance imaging, like MRI. You could imagine a region and you extract out a signal from that region and you compare that extracted signal with signals from other regions. And when you have two regions that have a high correlation in signal pattern or a high similarity in signal pattern, you could then say that those two regions are functionally connected. And you could use this method to to find other regions that have similar connectivity profile or similar signal pattern correlations, and then derive networks that way. You may ask the question, why is it called functional connectivity? Well, the simple history there is, we mentioned magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. You could have functional MRI, or you could have resting state MRI. In the functional MRI, you give a patient a task. It could be to tap their fingers. And when that happens, parts of the brain lights up. Now, what we find is that if you take away that task, that is, you have a patient without a task, and you look at, you use the functional connectivity style where you extract signals to find parts of the brain that have similar signal pattern. What you find is that the parts of the brain that have high correlations in signal pattern without a task looks very much like the parts of the brain that lights up in response to a task. Hence the notion of functional connectivity. That is, the connectivity you see without a task seems to indicate functional regions. So using this method, you could actually derive a host of, they're called resting state networks. Once again, it's called resting state because there is no task. Essentially, the patient is just in the scanner, not doing anything. And you could then extract signals and use that to find other regions that are correlated with the signal pattern from that extracted original region. And so you could derive a multiplicity of networks. Very importantly, there are three networks that are quite relevant, we think, to mental health and mental disorders. They are the central executive network, the salient network, and quite possibly the most famous network of all time, the default mode network. These three networks comprise something known as the triple network model. they're believed to underlie a host of human, or rather a host of cognitive functions and behaviors. The default mode network is a network that tends to be more active when you're not really engaged in any task. That is when you're internally directed, or when you're mind wandering, engaged in social thinking, or it's called autobiographical thinking. The activity of the default mode network goes down when you're engaged in a task. And when you're engaged in a task, it's the central executive network that then comes online. And those are the regions that are then active. So the activity of the default mode network, in a sense, is anti-correlated with the activity of the central executive network. They tend to go in opposite directions, and they tend to counteract themselves like a yin-yang relationship. The salient network is believed to mediate the dynamic switching and interactions between the default mode network and the central executive network. And the salient network is also believed to be active when there is a behaviorally relevant stimuli in the environment. It's very important network. It's implicated in a host of diseases or mental disorders. And so the whole idea is that the dynamic interaction between these three networks is central to mental health, to cognition, to emotional processes, to behavior, to perception. And if something goes wrong in these dynamic interactions, mental disorders could ensue or could occur. You could ask the question additionally, how do we quantify the relationship between these networks? Well, there are various kinds of even more detailed questions you could ask, such as what is a connectivity pattern within a given network, say within the default mode network, and what is a connectivity pattern between networks? Say, what is a connectivity pattern between the default mode network and the salient network? To help in these investigations, you could have a table. I call it a connectivity matrix or a connectivity table, where you have rows and columns, and you could have the various networks in the rows and columns, and then figure out their relationships in terms of if they are more or less connected. And you could investigate within network connectivities, that is, connectivity between regions of the same network. You could investigate between network connectivities, that is, connectivity of regions, or rather, connectivity between two different networks. You could use this to assess one's overall network organization. And you can begin to see how this understanding or this perspective of networks and their relationships with themselves could provide insights into mental disorders. That is, you could conceptualize mental disorders as possible alterations in the connectivity patterns between and or within various resting state networks. All right, that was just a very, very, very quick, very brief overview of brain networks and how this might be relevant in mental disorders. Well, thank you. That was all I was going to talk about for today.